Hi, my name's JoHannah. I am 45 years old. I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and I am shunned.
All right, JoHannah. So how'd you come to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses in the first place?
Well, like most people in my generation and age, I was lucky enough to be born in. So,
Ah,
I was actually the youngest of seven kids, and my mom was a witness. I mean, she had a very brief brush with the witnesses when she was little. She had an uncle that was a witness. Otherwise, she didn't have any family at that time that were witnesses. And, it was back, her dad had been in World War II and he had come home and her mom had passed away and she was little and she grew up with a dad with PTSD and just a really rough home life. And so when her uncle would come to visit and give little tidbits about this paradise earth and her seeing her mom again and all this, the fantasy, right? It stuck. That was her thing that she really clung to because she had a rough go of it. And so when she was, I think, 16, she went with them to a convention, and it was back in the days where you could just show up and get baptized. You didn't
oh, wow.
have questions and all that stuff. So she just went to a convention and got baptized. And then she married my dad, who was not a witness, and she was inactive for a long time. And then when my first sibling was born, she kind of got back into it. And when she got back into it, she took off. And, so we were raised in a divided house, but she made up for it. She was a great mom. She was, homemaker, made the meals, took care of us. She was very affectionate, very kind. But she was equal parts devoted, excuse me, to the organization. And so we hadn't, no, I mean, we didn't have a choice. You went to the meetings, you went to in field service, you read the Bible, your daily text. I mean, it was very, very intense. And she verbally talked about kind of making up for the fact that because my dad, I'll talk about that a little bit later, but he was a truck driver. So he was on the road a lot. And so we didn't have the opportunity a lot of kids did in divided households where because he wasn't around that much, we didn't have his influence very much for non-witness things because, he was home on some weekends and stuff and you just kind of cram in the visit that you can. And so he left all of that. He made the money and he was a great dad, smart, loving, but he just wasn't physically there often enough for us to understand what else lied outside the walls of the Kingdom Hall. So,
So he couldn't have a whole lot of influence just because in those ways, simply because he was working away from home, uh, which I guess that's a shame in a lot of ways. I mean, a shame for him too. He missed out, I'm sure, on a lot of time with his kids, and
yeah,
you really see. You mentioned so your mom starts studying back with PTSD. Her father, who had PTSD from the war, she starts hearing these things. She's vulnerable. The message sounds wonderful. Sounds like something, it's music to a vulnerable person's ears. And then she has her first kid, and now she's vulnerable again in a new way. And she goes from inactive to very active because she's got kids to care for, and she wants to give them something better. And so, these are often the types of moments that lead people down this path.
yeah, absolutely. And actually, my mom and dad were married and they lost their first baby.
Oh,
She had a fine pregnancy, but the birth was really traumatic. And she had very terrible, very terrible time with it. And so when she did end up getting pregnant with my oldest sister now and had a successful delivery, she was it was like a double vulnerable state, right? She
yeah.
was still dealing with this horrible, terrible loss. But then at the same time, she was desperate for hope, and they love desperate people, especially, women who are so, they love their family so much and they want to do the best by them. And she just wanted us to have this literally a perfect life. And so understandably so, she was like ripe pickings for them. And so she raised us in a similar way.
Sure. So for little JoHannah, what was your worldview growing up in this? So now you're the last of seven, I think you said, and so everyone else I'm sure is kind of involved in this thing to some degree. It surrounds you. We'll get into your family a little bit more, but for yourself, how did it make you see the world around you when you were a little kid?
Oh my goodness. Maybe a lot of, I was not a really curious kid like lots of kids are. I was a really, really good kid. So I was also homeschooled. I was the only one of my siblings that my mom decided it would be a really good idea to pull me out of school for multiple reasons. Actually, and this is an interesting fact before I talk about my worldview and how that was shaped. I was homeschooled before it was popular with witnesses.
Mm-hmm.
The elders actually counseled my mom to keep me in school because that was my territory. And they did not want me to be removed from that situation. But she wanted to do it kind of as an experiment because I was the youngest. And she'd already taught me how to read and to write and all that stuff before I even went to kindergarten. And so the teachers had wanted to move me ahead in school, a grade or two. And I'm very tall and I was already tall for my age. And she already felt like I was uncomfortable oftentimes. And she didn't want me to have added pressure to be with older kids and feel like I had to act older. So she was like, this is an opportunity to try something. And my dad was really into education, but he relented and let her homeschool me. Thankfully, she actually did homeschool me. I was not just kept home from school.
So there was actual education going on, not just going out in service.
No, I mean, there was lots of service, of course, but I had my set time that I had to do my schoolwork. I was taken in and tested twice a year with other kids. So those were kind of the parameters that my dad had set if I was going to stay home from school. So that was, you can't regret what you don't know. So, there are parts of course, me wishing I'd gone to public school, but it is what it is at this point in my life.
Can I ask what grade were you in? Because it sounds like they pulled you out of school. So
Yes.
How long did you go to, I guess, public school?
I went to kindergarten and first grade.
Okay. So you were very young in this scenario. Okay.
Very young. So because of that, of course, that's a completely different feeling than being, what my worldview was going to be shaped. I didn't have really an option, right? We didn't have the internet. So we had news stories. And I just remember things like when the Berlin Wall came down. I was young, but I remember it well. And things like that even as a young kid would trigger like, oh my gosh, Armageddon's coming pretty soon then. World events that were, and so I had this constant, like, the world is bad. The world is terrifying. Every politician, every religious person is a terrible person. They're going to come for you at some point. And so I had a lot of, and as I got older, Armageddon became more and more fearful for me. When I was little, it wasn't like, I didn't have that traumatic response to like the Bible story book that some kids do. Pictures of like all the scary stuff that I don't know why I just didn't that much. But when I got older, the idea of like, am I good enough? Even though I was doing everything I possibly could, I just did have that fear of doom. And because everything outside of the Kingdom Hall walls was doom and gloom, right? Like, that's what I thought. Like, everything was terrible. Everything was ugly. And so it was probably more traumatic in the moment than I even realized. And it wasn't until I was out of it, awake, moved on, that I looked back and was like, wow, I carried a lot of heavy stuff on my shoulders for a kid.
Well, yeah, you and I are the exact same age, 45. The 80s, they were really hammering home a lot of that stuff about the end of the world, which they always do, but I mean it was very doom and gloom, very scary, very like you're going to be thrown in concentration camps, very afraid of world events, which I mean, I guess I'm sure they do have done since as well. I know they do. This is just what we were raised with. But I just remember a lot of that growing up. They were pretty intense. I think after
Yes.
1975 and that all fell apart, there was kind of a renewed sense of trying to be super intense about this and get people scared again, right? After that had fallen apart and not come to fruition like they thought.
Yeah, and the 80s were like a weird time because we had some really big, scary stuff. You had the ozone layer, right? You had this real true threat of like environmental collapse at that time, which thankfully they did all the things they were supposed to do so that they could fix that situation. And then AIDS came along, and that was this terrible, I remember these articles about how like by the year whatever 2000, 1 in 4 people, will have died from AIDS and HIV, and just that, like the fear mongering within the organization, but then externally because of the news reports and these terrible things going on. And the organization loved to jump on that and to highlight only that negative stuff so that you were kept with like, oh, Armageddon's going to have to come and fix this. It's going to have to come and fix that because this is a real big thing. And then, as time went on and science got involved and things actually started easing, it would be the next big catastrophe, right? If it was a natural disaster, what have you. But yeah, the 80s were a weird, weird time, man.
And I guess, now, as you're saying it, hey, we can go with COVID and climate change, right?
Right.
Or social
Yep.
unrest and things that, so things that need to be taken care of and that we're seeing more calls for that. So there's a lot, and Ukraine, and they can use all that today as well, and I've seen that at times, even in my coaching practice, where like at the beginning of COVID and everything that was happening, there were people who reached out because they were honestly feeling like they were going to go back, and they were
Yeah.
like, please talk me out of this, please help me with some perspective on this. And so we would talk. But that's yeah, I guess there's always probably opportunity for them to exploit because the world is what it is. But growing up specifically in the 80s, they weren't they didn't have the happy clappy music and some of the things that they have today. They were much more dire about things, and things were much more dark
Yeah.
as far as their language around a lot of things.
I mean, even a lot of publications, if you look back at those, some of those things, I don't think they would ever put in things probably now, with the terror on people's faces at Armageddon and things that are just like so intense. And looking, and you're sitting there in your book study as a 12-year-old, like answering about the harlot, right? And it's just and then in the next breath, they tell you not to watch bad movies or video games because God hates violence. And that like, combination of what? In the moment, you don't think about it until you're removed from it. But, yeah, I mean, the world was scary. Worldly people were bad. Even, my mom loved my dad's relatives and everything. And she respected them and made sure that we knew our grandparents. We still had very limited contact, right? Because we were still counseled that they were still worldly and we would witness to them and do what we could, but we couldn't have those close ties that like our other cousins had with each other because they were worldly. It was bad. And, you look back on it and you're like, my goodness, keeping a 7 or 8 year old from another 7 or 8 year old that you're related to because that you're afraid they might be influenced. I mean, that's how deep that went, that you were on guard literally from the time that you could learn emotion and conversation. You were on guard your whole life. So it was.
Hypervigilance and fight or flight are characteristics of, that life, and
Yeah.
always being afraid of everything outside. I just actually went to a wedding, my first ever non-Jehovah's Witness family wedding of a cousin of mine a couple weeks ago, and it was cool and it was fun, but I've really only met these people once or twice in my life, and it was like going to a stranger's wedding on some level, and
Yeah.
it was fun, and I wanted to see how my people get down at a wedding, I guess, but I've never experienced that before, and here I'm at 45 years old for the first time going and experiencing something that should have just been a normal part of life, and
Yeah.
so you see the shunning was part of our DNA too, from an early age, taught to push people away all the time, even family, and it's part of what they set us up for later. So
Yeah, it's crazy what they rob from you, right? And
yeah,
it's like, even though you get older and you wake up and you get out and you reconnect with people, everyone's at a certain point in their life. You have relationships already built, you have habits, and so it's hard to integrate into existing circumstances with adults who people have kids and maybe grandkids. And it's like that. It's a formal, like, yes, we'll see you at weddings. Oh, we'll, think to maybe have you over. And it's not an affront by anybody. It's just that you haven't been there for 40 years. And now you are. And it's just a shame.
it is.
Yeah.
So so let's talk then about your family a little bit. So what was life like at home growing up? You mentioned it excuse me, a little bit, but what was the temperature of the room? You talked, your mom seemed very devoted both to you kids and the
Mhm.
family, but also to the organization. What was life like growing up in that?
Yeah, I mean, it was great. I think any family that's a witness is, like we mentioned earlier, it's kind of a cult within a cult. So any problems that we had, any issues that came up, were kept very quiet. We dealt with things as a family unit because we didn't want anything to leak out to the congregation to make us look bad as a family. But also, possibly other people outside the organization, and then bring reproach. So it was that trickle down effect of like, keep it in-house. And my mom was brilliant. She was a phenomenal mother. She took care of us. She did always put us first, I will say, even though there were so many of us and she was very devoted. Her kids did come first. So if we were sick or we needed help, she was not one of those like, I'm going to go to the meeting and you're going to be left at home with 100-degree temperature. She was very balanced with like being a really great mom. But at the same time, because she was a witness and everything was very spiritual, even though I loved her and I knew she loved me, I knew there were certain things I could never talk to my mom about because the counseling would come. And it was, even though she would say she loved us unconditionally and it wasn't her fault, there was a condition to it, right? And
Of course.
I'm not saying she didn't love us, but she treated you a different way, or the conversation she would have with you. And so even those relationships that are supposed to be the very tightest relationships had to be guarded because, you couldn't, whether it be doubts or liking a boy or whatever, I just knew there were things it was an instinctive, natural thing I knew. And a lot of it was because I was the youngest and I was able to observe her relationships with my siblings, right? When they hit certain ages, see the way that went. And so you just learn what to keep in and what not to share. So, my dad had converted, he'd become a witness back in the 60s, late 60s, kind of to just appease her. He was never really active, but he got baptized. And then immediately after, he started working in jobs and stuff that he just wasn't around that much. So it was easy for him to be inactive. So we grew up with kind of a stigma within the congregation, even, and I think that's why my mom tried triple hard to make sure we were early to the meetings, always studied, always looked nice, always took the lead in field service, because we were one of the only families that came with a non-witness dad, a dad who wasn't an elder. We were in a very, like, everyone were a full family in our congregation. And so we kind of had a stigma, like even though we were doing the best we could, we were just not always thoroughly treated the best by other people in the congregation, because most of the other people in that hall were also related to one another. So we always felt a little bit like outsiders. But my mom cultivated a very artistic life at home too. So almost all my siblings like played an instrument. I have a sister who used to perform in small areas, like venues, like here or there. And so we had a pretty interesting culture of like doing other fun things too. And our house was kind of like the place for other kids to come, because there were so many of us. Like if, we would have a friend or two over, everyone else would have a friend or two. Our house was full all the time.
There's a lot of people.
Yeah. And, we'd be playing music and playing cards, and we were a loud, like outgoing bunch of people. And so, all that stuff was always very fun, but we always towed the line, right? Like you didn't do anything that was too crazy as with your friends, or, you made sure that if everybody came on Saturday night, you were in bed early because you had to get up early Sunday morning for the meeting. So that part of it was great, but we had a lot of dysfunction at the same time. That's the flip side of that. It's like, that's great. It was wonderful. Those are the warm memories that you look back on, but we had dysfunction. My dad ended up getting disfellowshipped when I was 14 because he smoked cigarettes. And so that's why they disfellowshipped him. And so then that was a stigma that you had to carry around as a 14-year-old, the person in the hall with the disfellowshipped dad. And then it was so uncomfortable when he came home, because I loved my dad and he was so smart and so warm and just a fabulous father. And yet I looked down on him because he was disfellowshipped. And so I didn't allow myself to feel a lot of those warm, fuzzy emotions towards him when I was young, because I was terrified he was going to die Armageddon any day. And so I had to try to separate, my emotional tie to him when I was a teenager. And that's a terrible spot to be in. So it was, and then during that time, from the time I was about 6 to about 9 or 10, I was being abused by an older relative during that whole time. And I had to keep all that secret, because it was just an awkward, weird time when it came to child abuse. It wasn't until I was a teenager I even realized that's what it was. So
yeah, it wasn't really talked about so much back then at all.
No. And if it was there were very distinct lines about things. Like it was a little kid and it was a stepdad, or it was a dad. And, this was somebody who was a teenager. So I didn't know, like, is that even like abuse? Because nobody talked about anything back then. So, I'm carrying around that weight. I had a sister that passed away in a motorcycle accident. So the whole circuit used her as an example of like, this is what happens when you leave, because she was the first sibling I had that left the organization. And it was like a week after she left and moved out, and she was killed in an accident. So people were telling my mom that like, she's not going to be resurrected, like at the funeral, like you shouldn't be having a witness funeral, because yeah. And so, you have all these traumas and this dark, like heavy stuff. And I just look back on it. It's like, my mom was like struggling so hard to bring some kind of normalcy and joy and other stuff that wasn't related to the witnesses, I think, into our lives, with music and art and gardening and all these things that I think brought her joy. And, she never really dealt with her traumas either. And so it was just like, read the Bible, hope for paradise. And that's a terrible thing when you are like 6 or 7 years old and you're thinking that you have to wait for Armageddon for things to be good and better, and you aren't really validated in anything that is painful, because you have to be the happy people, and so you have to just grin and bear it when you go to the meetings or in field service, and throw yourself into service. It makes you feel better. Other people have it worse than you. Like all those platitudes that don't do anything but really make you feel like you're going crazy sometimes. So,
well, sure. And were you, so, your sister is, there's this trauma of your sister dying in this accident and then being used. Oh, this makes my skin crawl. And this is why people, when they leave, they think, oh, something bad is going to happen to me, because
right.
things like this are used to try to terrify people from leaving, because you're going to go out into Satan's world and, you're going to get cancer. You're going to, like, something horrible is going to happen to you. And they
Yep.
use things like this. But what they should have been doing was actually supporting you guys. And I guess that would be my question. So, like, your dad is disfellowshipped. Does anybody support you all? Your sister dies. Does anybody support you all? Were you all getting any support from the congregation, or were you all at least able, even as a family, to talk about these things in real, meaningful, helpful ways?
Yes and no. So my sister passed away when I was like 6 years old. And so my dad at that time was inactive, but he wasn't disfellowshipped. So the congregation showed up and they did support, all the food shows up and the people come over, and people were really upset because she was absolutely loved and adored. She was very outgoing. All the young people, she just cared for all the young people. She was just an absolutely gem of a person. So people were really, really upset. And we had like that initial phase of like, oh my goodness, she's passed. Everyone is shocked. People are supportive. But then it kind of started after that with some of that awkward, uncomfortable conversations. It was like some of the elders were finally gearing up to have the hard talk with my mom. Like, and again, you go back, this would have been in the early 80s. So you still had that flow over of, the older elders then who were like from the 50s, right? And some of those guys, I mean, they drove a hard bargain. They were like, by the book, no kind of compassion. It was like, we don't need to talk about the paradise for you to be a witness. You do it because God's a jealous God, right? Like that was their approach oftentimes. And so you would have those terrible things that people would say that I don't know if they were meaning well. I don't know why they felt the need to counsel my mom, but they did. And so it was it was kind of like the home life. There were really great, fine aspects. There were other parts that basically just were another trauma. And of course, when my dad was disfellowshipped, fast forward to that, he's disfellowshipped. And all of a sudden it went from my friends being over to our house all the time to getting that phone call on a Friday to say, well, is your dad going to be home this weekend? And all of a sudden nobody at our house anymore for me having to go to my friends, or, my dad feeling like he was getting the message that our social life was falling off. So he would not be home certain weekends, he'd make sure he stayed on the road or something. And, you have milestone moments that he doesn't show up for because he doesn't want to make other people uncomfortable. And it was very loving of him to do that for other people. But, I'm at graduation and my dad isn't there because my graduation party, everyone's there, but my dad, because he's not a witness and everyone is. And it's just that was when the idea of like how bad it is to be shunned and shunning, that was my first brush with it. And, you in the moment, you just deal with it like you do with any other trauma. But when you look back, that's probably one of the most painful. Even though I've been through other horrible traumas, that still is probably one of the most ongoing, regretful, painful things, is that all those years, formidable, important. He should have been there. He was a great guy. And he just didn't want to be a witness anymore. So he couldn't be.
He was shamed away from his own family,
Yeah.
essentially. And that's so awful. I'm so sorry that happened to all of you, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just not fair. And yeah, there's really nothing Jehovah's Witnesses can't make worse. If there is a trauma, they're never really there to offer. They might offer a meal or something and a little encouragement for a minute, but then there always comes this judgment. And it's sad because you all were trying so hard. Your mom was trying so hard. Even if your dad wasn't a part of that, you all should have been not the one people kind of whispered about or had weird feelings about. You all should have been lifted up as the example of, you know, here you all are trying, even though you maybe don't have a dad who's part of this. And your mom should have been a beacon of light, you know, in the
Yeah.
congregation for that reason. But instead, you know, it's like the person who comes late to the meeting in their work clothes. You know, that person is killing themselves to get there.
Right.
And then they are talked about and demeaned and looked down upon. I've been that person at times. It's not fun. And they really, you know, Jehovah's Witnesses really shoot their wounded. They don't help them. They
Yeah.
don't
No.
they don't really lift them up. And it's a shame. Well, I mean, it's a shame because it ends up causing all of this pain. At times it can cause people to leave. And
Yeah.
that can be a positive, net positive in the end. But there's a lot of pain that comes along with it all. And it's just it doesn't have to be that way.
No. And I am grateful that later in life, you know, I was able to have a really good, strong, unconditional relationship with my dad for a few years before he passed away. And I think that obviously you can't make up for lost time, but you know, we had conversations that were stripped down all about everything that needed to really be said. And you know, you look at it and you go, really, you were disfellowshipped for smoking cigarettes and people treated you like they shunned you like the plague. And then the person that abused me later, when I ended up going to the elders and he ended up admitting it, was reproved and moved to another congregation and continued to have a totally
Of course he was.
life. Like, to make a person feel like they absolutely do not matter, and that being victimized in that way isn't as big of a deal as you think that it is. It's amazing. It's amazing that I'm still here, and it's amazing that I am functioning, healthy, mentally healthy person, because it makes you doubt everything about you and your, you know, you go, my dad smoking cigarettes is worse than somebody abusing a child for years. Like that's just because one of them said they were sorry more times than the other person said. Like just that moral, the absolute lack of any moral compass in that in that organization, and that people still defend it, knowing, and that's kind of what boggles my mind personally, is my relatives know, they've lived through it all with me, and they still think that that's an organization chosen by God.
Yeah, it's disgusting, you know. So
Yeah.
smoking cigarettes is put on the same plane as abusing children, murder, you know, like there's no
Right.
degrees, you know, everything you just mess up, you're deserving of death and estrangement. Well, but I guess not really, right?
Right.
Because sometimes you can just be reproved for something super horrendous. And
Right.
so, and I didn't want to gloss over that either. You know, so I don't know. So you had said that I think it was between the ages of 6 and 10.
Yeah.
And so that was happening. And just nobody knew. So you were just
Right.
a little girl who was holding all of this in
Correct.
for all of that time. And uh, did it? So I guess it came out later. I don't know the timeline of this. So I'm
Yeah.
kind of shooting in
So,
the dark here.
yeah. So when my dad was disfellowshipped when I was 14, and for the next like year, I kept dwelling on that because I kept thinking like, well, maybe if I say something about like if smoking cigarettes is that bad, maybe if I say something about what happened, then that person will be punished. Maybe, but I didn't know because I still didn't know if what happened to me, even though he was a teenager and I was little, if it was even technically abuse.
Sure.
So I remember I was babysitting because I was like pioneering at the time. So I started regular pioneering when I was 11 and or 12. I was baptized at 11. And so between pioneering, I would babysit. So I was babysitting and the kids were like down for a nap, I think. And I was like watching one of those like Sally, Jesse, Raphael shows.
Yep. Remember those?
Yeah.
Yep.
And it was about survivors of childhood sex abuse. And one of the cases, the woman was talking, and it was the exact ages. She was the exact age I had been, and her abuser was the exact age that mine had been. And I was like, it was like a light bulb moment for me. I was like, okay, so what I feel all these years has been right. It's okay. And, like you have to carry that around and figure out that way. I mean, it's just bonkers. So I was trying to like figure out what I was going to do. And then he was appointed a ministerial servant. And so the next day, I was in field service. I was getting ready to go. I was in the field service meeting. My mom, my older sister, and I all were regular pioneers. So we all were in the same field service meeting, making up car groups and all that good stuff. And we went out the door, and I just remember my heart just leapfrogging out of my chest. And I just stopped. I dropped all my stuff, and I just had like a total breakdown in the middle of the sidewalk. And my sister came over and she said, "Oh no, what's wrong? What's wrong?" And I just blurted like what had happened, who'd abused me for years. And, to her credit and to my mom, of course, had gone through that when she was young, and they scooped me up and they took me away. And, to their credit, my mom believed me, of course. She was absolutely 100% advocate for me. And I'm grateful every day that I didn't have to deal with what some survivors do of the doubt or the minimizing or anything else. But of course, the answer was go to the elders. So, but yeah, so that's how I ended up like expressing what happened. And because I did, my mom actually was the person that confronted him because I just couldn't, I was too emotionally bankrupt. And he admitted it. And then he went to the elders and he admitted it to the elders, apologized. I would understand if it was like a once or two onesie twosie thing, but years worth of abuse and you're baptized for the last couple of years of it, like that's not okay.
And
so I just remember feeling so empowered after I like talked to the elders and like, he's going to get it. My dad was disfellowshipped for smoking. Like he's going to be treated that same way. And they said he's going to be publicly reproved. And then he moved to a different congregation in a different state the next week. He was married to somebody about 6 months later, and he's an elder now. And
it just pisses me off how somebody like that just moves away and
yeah. And I will say, he, of course, he apologized. He did all the things that you're to do, and that's fine. I don't know him. I don't know if he really feels that way. I don't know. I don't care to waste my time to figure any of that stuff out. But, because for years and years and years and years, whether it be publicly, privately, I mean, for example, the week after conversation with the elders and all of that, the elders said they wanted to have a shepherding call with us because I've been through so much. So they have the shepherding call. And the topic that they picked to talk about was, drumroll, the importance of forgiveness. And
While your dad's disfellowshipped.
yeah. And so they're basically counseling me about keeping things private, forgiving people, no matter how great the sin, our salvation depends on it. The whole thing, right? And I remember, so my mom was a great lady and she was very dedicated, but she had a little bit of a rebellious streak in her. And that's why I think to this day, I wonder how she'd be feeling about the organization now, because she used to confront the elders. She would have situations where she got counseled because she would not agree with certain things. And
Well, if ever there was one to confront about, here's one.
she'd write Bethel about things. She would talk to the circuit overseer. She was like that one who she was a regular pioneer and she tried really hard, but she was not a yes woman either. And I think that's why I ended up like waking up all the way, because I was like, Mom wouldn't have stood for even though she was like raised us all to be, this is the truth. Like she just had that streak, just enough. And, they left and she basically said, like, forget everything they said. I'm sorry that you had to listen to that, and you do what you want to do. Like, that sort of thing. Like, if you want to forgive him, if you don't want to forgive him, that's on you. But even though that was great, there was a very unspoken push for me to like get through it, get over it, move on, accept that he's sorry, accept that he's not that person, accept that this was a mistake. And so I couldn't really deal with that trauma even until.
Yeah, because when do you get to deal with your feelings around it, right? Even them coming and telling you to forgive him, that's all about, like, they're just telling you to let it go and
Right.
to not feel your feelings.
Right.
And the denial that Jehovah's Witnesses live in. Not that forgiveness may not end up being a place that can be a good place to get to at times for ourselves.
Yeah.
But we've got to work through our own feelings and actually feel them first, not just dismiss them as though they're invalid.
Yeah. And that's no one's place to tell another person. I don't care if you're an elder. I don't care if you're, a guy on the street. Like, don't tell somebody else to forgive someone else if you haven't been there. Like, let them work through what they have to work through and encourage them to feel what they want to feel. But, but you just, again, hang on to the hope that Armageddon's coming. Jehovah's going to straighten it out. You're going to forget everything that bad happened to you in this world, and you're going to have this perfect, wonderful panda petting life. And so you just bury it and bury it and bury it. And you go, oh, maybe tomorrow's the day that, I'm going to be in paradise.
Can I ask, you said you got baptized at 11, I think you
Yes.
threw it out there. Okay. Did you have any hope or inkling, or were you just doing it for Jehovah? Did you think that maybe it would help with what you had gone through? Because sometimes people will get baptized for that reason. Or did you feel any pressure? Or was it just for you, just kind of, this is the thing that my family does and I'm part of this thing?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it was really just like, I want to do this. I want to pioneer. I want to. And again, if you think back, this would have been what, 88, 87, 88. And the world was ending anytime. And, you just have that, like, also, I was very mature for my age. I mean, I was like 5'7". I'm 11 years old and I'm 5'7". And I had this pressure because I looked older, act older. I was ahead in school, my schooling, I was way ahead. So I just had this, like, I never was self-aware of my age. I just felt like, oh, I'm so mature. I need to do this, right? This is the next step and I need to do it. And why would I wait? Because I'm going to love this forever.
Isn't that what they tell you? I mean, that's the reasoning they give you, right?
Yeah.
It's the truth. Why would you wait?
Right.
And most kids aren't in the witnesses aren't really allowed to be super childlike. We were all kind of programmed. That doesn't mean there aren't a lot of immature people. There certainly are immature people, and then just kids getting to be kids, which is wonderful too. But a lot of us had a lot of pressure to grow up pretty young.
Yeah.
And to be little adults. We were kind of taught that was the expectation.
Yeah.
Childishness was kind of foolishness and not really to be tolerated. And so, yeah, a lot of us did grow up really fast.
Yeah. And then you had on top of it, I'm in a family, we've just had one trauma after another, right? And then you have personal trauma, and all of that makes you different than your peers. You don't, the things you've gone through by the time you're 10 or 12 are maybe some things that people don't go through their whole life. And so you have this whole other set of like things. So yeah, I got baptized at 11. And it was like an immediate, like, I felt like my life's changed. I have to pledge everything I can. And my mom was going to start pioneering that next year. So, because back then you had to wait a year after baptism to start regular pioneering. You could auxiliary pioneering like right away. So I think like that next month we signed up to auxiliary pioneer. My mom had always wanted to pioneer, but she made her family a priority. So she always she made sure we were raised and mostly out of the house. I was the last one home. I was the youngest. So she was like, we can work out a schedule for your schooling. And then, we spend the days in field service. And so I had a sister that was married and out of the house, but in the same hall, in the same congregation. So we all three signed up together, and at ripe old age of 12, and we were pioneered. And then 13, we were at pioneer school, which is a 2-week, curriculum course. And that was so as soon as you pioneer, if you make it a year, they have pioneer school that you go to, and it's pioneers from your circuit. It's a small group. I think there were like 30 of us. And you have 2 instructors, and there's circuit overseers. And for 2 weeks, every day for 2 weeks, you learn the deep things. And it's basically just hardcore programming on how to convince people to be a Jehovah's Witness. That's all it is. It's tips and tricks to help brainwash people.
Yeah, thinking right now, picturing a 13-year-old girl sitting in a class like that with adults, that is, it's mind-blowing to think of a 13-year-old in that environment and situation.
Yep.
That's so wild.
It was intense. And so then one of our instructors was our circuit overseer at the time, who's Steve Lett. So it's like, so he was, he's not as animated, of course, when it's like one-on-one in those situations. But, at the time it was like, we were so blessed because we had this person who was our circuit overseer, and he's of the anointed. And now he's teaching our pioneer school. And, he is still really tight with my sister, who's still pioneering to this day. And so it's like, looking back on it, what a waste. What a waste. And then I pioneered all the way up until I was 19 and got into the real world. And then I was like, oh, I don't think I'm going to do this anymore.
Okay. So allow me to break in here for a second. This channel is made possible by you, the listener. If you appreciate what we're doing here, please consider supporting at patreon.com/shunned, or leave a review on iTunes or other platforms. Like and subscribe. All those things help the channel. If you're looking for merch, you can go get some Shunned swag from the shunnedpodcast.com website, or reach out there to be on the show. If you're looking for more ex-Jehovah's Witness content, I'll recommend my first podcast called This JW Life. You can find that on podcast apps as well as YouTube. And if you're feeling stuck in life, struggling to find happiness and community, maybe you're haunted by the past, beating yourself up, unsure of who you are or what you even want out of life now that you've lost this one identity that was given to you by a cult, reach out through my other sites like exjwhelp.com, that's exjwhelp.com, or storyworkscoaching.com. And let's see about working together to help you find a life that fits you and who you are, maybe for the first time ever. And now, back to our guest. I mean, it's always interesting anytime I talk to somebody or somebody, has met one of the governing body members back in the day or whatever.
Yeah.
And honestly, I've heard the same thing about Let, that he's not this I don't know, super over the top caricature that he does in his talks is kind of like this stage presence type thing more than it is who he is off the stage.
Yeah.
Um, which I guess good
Yeah.
because he's weird on the stage.
Yeah.
But a lot of people have met these individuals over time, and they're just people.
Yeah. And I mean, like the smaller the stage, so the fewer of the audience, the more that goes down. So like one-on-one, he's like kind of downright boring. He's very vanilla, very aloof. Just nothing special about him at all. His wife she was a joy. She was a doll, but he was just kind of boring. And then, for the pioneer school, since it was a smaller group, he was a little animated, but it was enough to keep your interest and not distracting, not like what's wrong with this guy. And then at the Kingdom Hall meetings, it was a little bit more. And then each time circuit assembly, it was really big. And then the conventions were like what you see him now on the broadcasting. So it's like he just amplified it every time. And then and then he knows how to pull it back.
Well, I mean, honestly, there's an infectious thing there.
Right.
Not that I was ever any big time traveling speaker or anything, but I've given some parts and talks on circuit assemblies and district conventions in the past, and there's an expectation, there's a cadence to the way people speak, and you're expected to build things up to a crescendo and then to stop, give people a chance to absorb that moment, and then to bring it down. And so you just learn that there's this sing-songy way almost that you do things. It is infectious. I just remember even as a kid realizing I was doing it to some degree and realizing that I couldn't stop.
Yeah.
It was like, I guess it's like in other religions, you see people maybe like fall out on the floor and flop and speak in tongues and all this, and there's this peer pressure where people then start doing that, and there's nothing to it other than the pressure of all of this. And it's a similar thing, I think, even in just our affect when we go up on stage and such. Lots of people had different prayer voices and different things, and you would know, I noticed this anyway, even in myself at times, but I couldn't stop it because it was just part of, you just get caught up in the thing.
Yeah, and it's all very targeted emotional manipulation. It's very purposeful to get people
Sure.
invested emotionally in whatever is going to be coming next, right?
But like I was doing it and I was just caught up in the emotional manipulation of the thing that was then manipulating me to catch other people up in the emotional manipulation of the thing. And I was just a kid, but I still recognized that this was different.
Yeah.
When you were in those, you were made to feel different. You were talked to differently. Just everything was different. It's a weird experience that I think, like so many of the things we experience, if you haven't been there, you don't know what it's all very strange. But back to you. So you're in pioneer school at 13. Gosh, that's so heavy. And then, you end up continuing to pioneer. Did anything happen as you went toward like 19? You have some seminal moments in there. 16 is a big year for people because they can drive sometimes. 18, or when you graduate, did you have anything that happened between then, or was it just pioneering?
I was pioneering. We also spent a lot of summers doing unassigned or seldom work territory. So Iowa, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, like lots of time. I mean, it was intense. Like service was like, there was a lot of field service. And back then it was 90 hours a month required, but we were always over that. I mean, it was because my mom was always about like, oh, someone needs time, so let's throw on a dress and go knock on some doors for a couple hours tonight or something. It was just, so besides that, at that time, we still had the 5 meetings a week. And, I was a pioneer, even though I was a tween. So I had to represent, you have to set a good example. So I had to study hard and deep for all these meetings. And then I started giving talks when I was like 6 years old. And so I'm then used all the time for field service demonstrations or giving a talk. And so like, and when I say giving a talk, how as much as women can, just the 2 women up
Sure.
there in the second school, but, prepping for that. So, you're just consumed. The amount of time that you have to spend being a witness, you didn't have time back then to think of anything else. And then you're policing your own thoughts in the meantime. So even if something did pop up, that was the other thing. My mom was a little bit of a rebel, I mentioned. So every once in a while, she'd be like, oh, there's this movie and I really want to see it, but it's rated R. So we're going to go out of town. So we would drive like an hour to another.
Oh, wow.
It was out of our circuit so that if a witness saw us, they wouldn't know us. We would go, like, we went to like, oh my gosh, like A Time to Kill, Die Hard, Terminator 2. Like she was very into like action movies and comics and that sort of thing. And so there was, but then she would be like, don't tell anybody. And that was kind of the unspoken. So I had that kind of peppered into my routine in my life. So it was just a little bit of that rebelliousness. But then if I were to think about something bigger or deeper, because my biggest thing that I used to question was, why do we go in field service when, especially after Pioneer School, they talked about a lot, how Jehovah draws the right person and, the heart condition and all of that stuff. But then you're like killing yourself in field service, right? And so I used to think like, this is an oxymoron kind of like, why am I working this hard to find the person if he's going to draw him? Like, isn't that the person that like finds a tract on the street and then finds the witnesses? But I would stop myself. I would get so far in that question and then I would like go back and study and read, because I thought that was just like an earmark for someone who's going to die at Armageddon if you push too hard. So I would just shut myself down mentally and I would not go there. And so, all my friends were witnesses. And so, yeah, I started driving and I would start working. I was a waitress, but I was still pioneering. So it kind of was meeting some worldly people, but I was a very good witness. So I always witnessed to them or I made it known right away. And so, and I was never like the boy crazy one. So I never like had any interest in dating because I never thought that the world was going to last long enough. So like, I knew I would never have kids in this system because, it was going to come to an end. And I was in that generation of people who like, you don't have kids, they would tell you like, it's because Armageddon's going to come. It's going to be too hard to try to save them through Armageddon and all that stuff. So it's like, I just wrote that off when I was young. And so I never even thought about like dating and I had brothers. So all my friends were the guys anyway. And I just never, so the romantic part for me was not what it was for a lot of girls who were 16, 17, 18. That's when I saw a lot of my friends kind of leaving because they were getting in trouble that way. And so I was just such a good kid. And like I say, I was constantly afraid, like if I'm going to mess up, not only am I going to probably die at Armageddon, but it's going to break my mom's heart because she's already, struggled to raise us so well. And you have my dad that's disfellowshipped and you have my sister that died. So I didn't want to rock that boat. I want her to be happy. And so I just kept plugging along.
Fear, obligation, and guilt.
Yep.
Right? The fog. That's, that's what keeps you from even thinking about something too deeply. I find it interesting to hear you say that about how you would see things and that's a really good point about why do we need to go out and work so hard to preach, or to overcome conversation stoppers and such.
Right.
Wouldn't the angels draw, help that situation? Wouldn't Jehovah draw them? So you see these things, but then you stop it because you have too much to lose if you continue to allow yourself to dwell on that, or you're taught thought stopping techniques like, who are you to question Jehovah? Or are you running ahead of Jehovah's chariot? Just little things to shame you back into compliance. Um, it's, I think for anybody listening or watching who was never one of Jehovah's Witnesses, I think I would want to just a little vignette from what you said. Think about a grown woman who wants to watch a movie having to go hide in a theater in another town so that she can watch that movie without being seen. Like, that is not freedom, right? You are
No.
clearly captive to something if you have to do that to watch a movie. That is not normal behavior, and for people who are free. And it's really sad. When you said that, it really struck me. A lot of people have to hide little part. You're hiding a little part of who you are and what you like.
Mhm.
And that's just sad for adults to have to do that.
Yeah,
And
I mean, it's like she's watching Terminator 2. It's not like she's off watching some kind of weird porn. Like, come on. It's like, it's insane.
it is. It really is. I always appreciate little moments like that because I think, it is hard for people outside or who have never been there to understand. But everybody watches movies. That's a normal thing. Can you imagine having to go hide in a theater somewhere else to watch a movie? I think that shows the level of control that this thing
Mhm.
has over people. That, I mean, good for your mom for at least being able to admit that that was a little part of who she was and she wanted to express it, but having to hide it is just really sad. She's an adult. She's not a child.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember, my mom never, I know there were a lot of kids in my era and right after me who, did no Disney, none of that stuff. And
Mhm.
or we never experienced that, thankfully. But I remember one of the funniest things, because I'm a huge comic book nerd, and she kind of started that with me. But I remember I had it was we called her an aunt, but she wasn't related. She was just a really good friend of my mom. And she was going on, it was when Superman maybe 2 had come out or 3, and she was going on about how it was such a terrible thing because, Superman, the comic or the idea behind it is basically a twisted version of like Jesus, because it's about a guy who sent his son to Earth and he was basically perfect as opposed to everyone. He was here to like save people, and how they bastardized the story of Jesus basically. And my mom was just like, and we left, and she goes, should we tell her that it was written by 2 Jewish men? Was created by 2 Jews? She thought, so like, she laughed, thought that was great. But so, she wasn't like real extreme with a lot of that stuff. But yeah, so if she wanted to see a special film that she really had read the book on or something, and it ended up being rated R, she would escape to another town.
Wow. So you're seeing these little things pop up that don't quite add up, I guess, just here
Yeah.
and there, but you're kind of pushing them down. Now you're getting to 18 adulthood basically. How do things progress for you?
So then it kind of all started to fall apart. I still believed that Armageddon was coming. And again, back to my mom being just a little bit rebellious. She had a lot of girls. She had 5 girls. And she very much wanted us to be able to support ourselves if we needed to, whether it be in the ministry. She didn't want us to have to rely on a man, which was a little ahead of her time.
Sure.
So she encouraged us to take a trade school or do something that we could work and make a living and, of course, still pioneer, hopefully. But she also wasn't like that was a make or break. She wasn't one of those people that said, go into the cleaning business so you can pioneer. She was like, do what you can kind of person, which was a little different. So I actually had gone to school back, this was years ago. So this was when like being a travel agent was a good profession. So I went to school for that because it was a trade school type back then. I went to school and then I started working, but I started working full time and I was trying to pioneer at the same time. So it was a little tricky. I was just dragging myself out on weekends and, some evenings because you're working 40 hours and then it's
That is tough.
service. It was tough. And I made it for like a year, but this is like, I went from all witnesses all the time to no witnesses at any time during the week. And then I'm like with people who are nice.
That was the identifying characteristic that stood out to you. These people are nice.
They're worldly.
Uh-huh.
They're going to die at Armageddon. They're bad, but they're like just decent people trying to work and make a living and take care of their kids and crack a joke. And nobody's trying to like force you to take drugs in the back or like, it's just the opposite of what I thought. And then I started meeting people that were like real scary, right? Like in the LGBTQ community. And I was like, why are these people so normal? This is not anything like what I thought it was going to be. So I started thinking like maybe people aren't all bad. Like, and then you feel like, oh no, remember they warn you about this. They warn you that people can be nice and it's just that they take no note, then they'll die, right? That was just what happened at Noah's day. So I was trying really hard, but I started feeling this like pressure of maybe this isn't all right. Maybe it's not okay to treat people like this. That was my thing. It wasn't even a doctrine. It was like, maybe we're kind of wrong about other people, not necessarily being terrible. And then I was extremely unprepared to deal with anyone from the opposite sex. So, I started dating somebody that I worked with. And I always joke and say it was on accident because I thought we were just like friends and like hanging out. And then I realized one day I was like, wait, I think we're dating. And then
how would you know, right? We never, you're not exposed to any of that. So you might mistake anything as either being dating or not dating because you have no frame of reference. You've never dated.
No. I mean, I had like one relationship with somebody when I was a witness that was very short and it was long distance. And so this was like an actual, like go to dinner, take you out kind of thing. Mm-hmm. One thing led to another. And then I got in trouble. And then I, of course, immediately went to the elders and I was really upset. And I thought like internally, I thought to myself, because I had just stopped pioneering because I couldn't carry the workload anymore. I couldn't pioneer and work anymore. And I just was, it was like, I was only like 19 and it was still like wringing me out. That's like 3 full-time jobs.
Oh, I did it. I get it. It's you just feel like you're constantly on the hamster wheel. When do you ever rest? It's horrible. You burn out.
And the meetings and everything. So I went to the elders and I thought, I'm going to come clean. I'm going to apologize and it'll be fine. It'll be fine. And so I did. I came clean. And then they said to me, okay, so you've totally broken it off. And this is like over. And I was like, kind of. They said like, so do you think that this is going to happen again? And I honestly just said, I'm not sure. Like, I was just trying to be as honest because that's what you're taught to do, right? To be as honest and upfront. And I was not the girl. I was very mentally in. And I was not the person who thought like, you have to hide stuff from the elders. I thought they're here to support you. They're here to encourage, to make you whole, to, they're not here to just police you and kick you out. And that's what happened. They kicked me. I was disfellowshipped. and I was like 20 and I was disfellowshipped. So
That had to have been quite a shock for a 20-year-old girl,
yeah,
woman who is fully believing, who's been through your own situation before where you reported something and someone was not kicked out.
right.
And I know, and I don't know if that was the case in your situation, but those judicial committee meetings can be very personal and creepy and gross in the questions that they ask. Like that had to have been very traumatic for you to be sitting there experiencing all of this.
Yeah. And I actually have a really good memory, really, really crazy good memory. And I can honestly tell you that committee meeting, I don't remember so much from because the result was so shocking to me that there was a part of my brain that just kind of like shut down.
Dissociated?
And I just went out. I just remember being in the parking lot and like sobbing so hard I had to sit in my car for like an hour because I was like, this is it. I've broken my mom's heart. I have to move out of my house. I am going to be treated like my dad was treated. And I'm cursing my assailant's name, who I know is living a high life, doing whatever. And so like I just thought like I was just it was terrible. It was another trauma. Thank you, Watchtower. And so, I did. I had to go home, tell my mom. So within about a 3-day span, I had to tell my mom what happened, pack my stuff, find an apartment, and be out on my own. The other thing they don't warn you about when you grow up the way we did is finances. Saving, spending, bills, balancing a checkbook. They don't tell you any of that stuff. And if you try to pursue it, you're materialistic for trying to plan for your future. And so I'm thrown out into the world. Yes, I'm making steady paycheck because I'm working full time, but I have no idea what rent, car payment, insurance, food. So, I'm not making enough. And so I had to have a roommate. And then I started working at night, like bartending, so that I could get myself kind of squared away. Or I was waitressing at night. And so it was just like, I didn't even have time to deal with my belief system or the trauma because I just was just like fire hose of life coming at you immediately.
So how long of a period was this? So I mean, you find out you're going to get disfellowshipped. Usually it takes a week or two for them to announce that. They had, whether they give you a week to appeal, which is a joke. And then, so you have to tell your mom, I don't know how that went. And then, I mean, how much time did you have to like gather your stuff and figure out where you're going to go and leave?
It was about a week. So
Wow.
I was out of the house when the announcement was made. I told my mom, I just like ripped it off like a Band-Aid and told her. And then I said, I'm not seeing this guy anymore. And she was upset, but I think she wasn't shocked because, moms have an intuition and I had been coming home late. I made weird excuses for where I was on a weekend. So she wasn't like, oh, I can't believe it. She was just disappointed. She tried to be real stoic because she came from that, don't let him see you sweat too much. So she tried to be a little stoic, but I knew she was terribly upset. And then, I'm getting phone calls from my siblings who are all different, just chewing me out. And how could you do this to mom? And why would you, and then you better get your ass back in and all this stuff. So I made a commitment to myself. I'm not going to be out for that long. And I kept telling them, I know it's the truth. I just made a mistake. I'll get back and, it'll be fine.
But I find it interesting that, because I'm just listening to your words, what you said and what your siblings said. The first thing that you were like is, oh, I did this to my mom. Your siblings, yeah. Oh, how could you do this to mom? It wasn't about Jehovah. It wasn't about God. It was about you're letting mom down.
Yeah. Well, that's your tangible, right? That's what you see. And that's what you, and it was, that was the first line of like, you know, she's been through enough. And
But honestly, that's kind of the reality of it too, is
right.
it is this, our dedication to Jehovah is as much a dedication to our families as it is to anything. And you know, the relationships that are going to be then used as part of the gaslighting to extort you emotionally after you leave, you know, that's all part of the setup. Is, you know, it really is this family dedication thing that we do.
Yep.
And it's just, I find it interesting that just everybody was instantly there, and I get it and I understand why. But I think that really that is the thing that most people are thinking about is, oh, I'm going to lose my relationships with actual humans. That is where you're feeling the pain.
Absolutely. And I think part of it too, we go back to the cult within a cult, right?
Mhm.
You're going to bring shame within the district and the circuit and the congregation on your family, because now you have this other dark check mark on it, right? And then, and then after that, you're bringing shame on the organization because of the fact that you've left. And then you get to the, you're bringing shame to Jehovah because you've left his organization. But yeah, I mean, it's always that whole, no one would be, I don't think, a witness if they didn't have either a family member that they were emotionally tied to, or an emotional strand to that organization that they cling to. Because I've also seen people who have become a witness because their family outside, what they did come from dysfunction and pain and abuse. And so they cling to this strand of like, oh, the hope of one day everything's going to be perfect and wonderful. And, you know, if I just stick with this organization all the way through, right? And so it's like a weird, both sides lose.
Oh,
Whether
absolutely.
family members that are in, and that's what you miss, or friends, or both, or that's all you've ever known in a different aspect.
So did your family enact the strict shunning from day one, or whenever it was announced, or whatever? I mean, was that it? Was that, were they going, did they go radio silent, so to speak?
They did. They did. My dad came to my apartment. That's when my dad and I started like reconnecting pretty much. He brought me my toolbox and tools and he said, you're going to need this. Don't ever let a man try to fix something for you until you try to fix it first. And then he and I would, you know, hang out like often because he and I were disfellowshipped. And then my brother ended up getting disfellowshipped, and he and I had been the two closest siblings. So we were able to, I had somebody like, you know, we were super, super tight. So that was great. But my other siblings, yes, my sisters, they all pretty much shunned me. And when I left, disfellowshipped, whatever you want to term it, my mom had been sick with cancer for years. I mean, on and off. She fought it for 7 years or something. So I was working, and I was working part-time at a music store in the mall, and I was 21, just 21. And she came in with my sister, and I knew immediately she was using a cane. So I knew she was sick. So they said they needed to talk to me, and she was terminal and she wasn't going to be around much longer. And you know, you're 21 and you've been not talking to your family for however long. And the cavalcade of emotion that hits then, it's like, I'm upset, I'm sad, I'm scared, but I'm also distracting myself with my new worldly, right? Like friends, and going to the bars and all that stuff. So I just remember, all I remember about that time is being like really scared and really upset but also not really believing it because she'd fought and beat cancer so many times before that I just kept ignoring it. It's almost like it was a trauma response that I'd been taught from the time I was young to just bury the realities, right?
Deny, right?
Deny. And then I got a phone call a few months later, and she was dying and she was at home. So they called me and they had me come home. So I'm really grateful I was able to come home. We were all there. I was there for about the last week. But you know, of course, you're sitting at her bedside and she's literally, her dying breath is telling you to come back to Jehovah. And you are surrounded by siblings that do absolutely love you, but absolutely are ashamed that you have taken the path that you have. So I was already still mentally in before, but then I'm really doubling down on that and knowing I've got to get back so I can see mom, right? The list of people I want to see is growing. So we made it through and everything. And then when mom passed away, she, of course, because she'd pioneered, she'd gone to multiple congregations. She had all these kids knew people. There were going to be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that were going to attend. But we also needed to let a lot of people know, like, immediately. Because again, it's pre-internet still, it's 1999. So you're still like having to pick up the landline and call people and tell them the bad news and ask them to pass it on. So we make the list, and I am going to take the non-witness family members, cousins, all relatives, let them know. My siblings are going to take the witness friend, the closest witness friends. And then there were like 2 elders on the list. And they told me, because I had the shortest list, they said, call these elders. And I was really uncomfortable. I said, well, I'm disfellowshipped. And my sister said, they're elders. They can talk to you. Like, just call them and tell them. She was and I was like, okay, I will. So the first elder I called, I literally said to them, I didn't even say hi. They answered the phone. I said, this is JoHannah. I'm sorry that I'm the one to call you, but I just needed to my family asked me to let you know that my mom passed away today, and they will get information to you about the services. First elder said, oh no, I'm so sorry. Please don't tell me you're asking me to do the service, because he had been really close with my mom. And he said, I don't think I could make it through it. And I said, no. I said, I just want to let you know. Click. Call the second elder. Same exact thing. He just says, okay, thanks for letting me know. And I hang up. Fast forward, we go to the funeral. Thankfully, my brother and my dad and I are all disfellowshipped. So it's like an us against that, not an us against them, but we could be together and we could have other non-witness.
You had support.
Right? This elder comes up to me at my mom's funeral and says to me, I just wanted to let you know that you are not in your current state, you are not to call anyone who's an active witness. And he's like, when you called me, you did not identify that you were disfellowshipped still. He's like, you should have at least said that, but it never should have been you. It should have been one of my brothers or sisters that should have reached out to me.
Because a funeral, this is a fantastic time to be an asshole to someone, to totally just take the wind out of their sails and shame them. What a jerk.
But just remember, I'm still mentally in.
Of course.
Sobbing and apologizing to him. And I'm just like, I'm so sorry. But then I'm like, don't say anything. You're disfellowship. So I'm just crying. And the whole thing was another traumatic, like, I am very grateful my siblings had me be involved. They after mom passed away, I was involved in helping make arrangements, find pictures, all of that. So I appreciated that. But then, as soon as everything was finished, I went back to my life and they went back to theirs. And, on occasion, I had a sister who would reach out to me just to make sure I was still okay. And but it was there. We were not really in close communication.
It's these are the situations, end of life situations that are so hard to figure out what to do with, and especially when you're mentally in. And I always find it interesting. Actually, somebody said this to me one. It was when my dad was dying, and I remember telling a worldly person that we cleaned for at the time um, what was kind of going on. And she looked at me and she said, well, actually, if they believe in shunning so strongly, shouldn't they, I mean, wouldn't right before they die be the time to definitely be, instilling this shunning thing? Like if it's right, then it should be right, especially at the end. Like you've got to seal the deal on this and make this. But isn't it interesting that that's not what Jehovah's Witnesses do most of the time?
Right.
Because their humanity, their base humanity, whatever they have left in there is still there, where they do want to have relationships. Again, most Jehovah's Witnesses, if the cult would abolish the shunning theology, I guess, or whatever their doctrine, then most people would not shun. They wouldn't choose to do this. They do it because they have to, though. I mean, some of us have been shunned long before we ever had to as well. So they might still, but you see their humanity for a minute shine through. They're people, and they want to go watch movies and have fun, and they want to have their family around in their last moments. But yet there's this ugly, ugly thing they're involved in that makes them act. My mom is not a monster, but my mom behaves in some monstrous ways.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because of that whole Jehovah's Witness piece. And then like that elder at the funeral, and then you having to get pictures together, just all that stuff. It's just trauma after trauma after trauma after trauma. They make everything worse. It's gross.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so sorry that happened to you. It's horrible.
Yeah, it's a real standout moment to me. It's like when you watch Schindler's List in black and white, and then you see the pops of red, right? It's like that for me. Like that whole week was kind of a black and white blur, and then you have these pops of like things that jar me still. Like I just go, why? Like, who thinks that's a loving arrangement to and then I'm thinking to myself, why are you coming up and counseling me if you're so offended that I'm disfellowship? You shouldn't be talking to me. Like, so it's because it was his choice, right? So it's wrong for me to make a choice if I'm going to literally be just a bearer of bad news, as opposed to if he's going to make the choice that he's going to tell me what he wants. And it's just so gross. And it was, for years and years, that is just, it sounds weird or petty. It's literally one of the things that stands out in my life of a wrong that was done to me when I was a witness. And of all I've had people do terrible things to me.
I'm pretty sure just listening to you right now, I could list quite a few things that were wrong that were done to you.
Yeah. But I mean, that's like one of those things that boggled my mind in a way.
Oh, it's super abusive.
And what's the point?
Horrendous.
What point are you making? Like the funeral's already here. I'm not calling other people.
The point he's making is that you're subhuman.
Right.
And he's letting you know that you're not one of them. You don't get to be, and don't you dare think you are. He is showing you who he is and who you are.
Right.
Which is honestly one of the reasons I'm glad. So, it's a mixed bag, but so I wasn't invited to my dad's funeral, but that hurt in its own way. But I also know, I mean, there were at least two elders there that were really good at, like, one in particular who liked to needle people when they were down. Like it sounds like this guy did. And I would have gone to jail. I would have swung on that guy. Like it would have been on. I could not have that guy had it coming for a long time. And
Yeah.
I'm not one of you now, and I'm not going to treat you with any reverence.
No.
And so like I think, but you see, like in these emotional moments, you see like they will get in there and be abusive, which is honestly like I'm surprised that there hasn't been, and I'll just say something truly, truly sad, newsworthy, and absolutely violent and awful happen in a Kingdom Hall yet, because they push people to their breaking point,
Mhm.
and they're even doing it in highly charged emotional situations like this. This is your mom's funeral. How messed up do you have to be to go pick on some young lady at her own mom's funeral?
Yep.
That's just disgusting.
Yeah, it was real, and it was someone who had been like a pioneer partner of ours for years and
Mm.
just quote loved our family, and we thought we had this like really great bond and stuff, and it just shows you how an emotion can be flipped on and off like a light switch with witnesses, because he went from being somebody that I at one point thought I could have confided anything in and been a helper and been there for me, to you know pointing his finger at me, like because I wasn't the status that I should have been.
Well, and that's why I have a hard time saying that Jehovah's Witnesses truly love you. They love a version of you.
Yeah.
They love that
Yeah.
they love you as long as you're who they want you to be. And then the
Correct.
love is withdrawn, which to me says it's not true love. It's affection, it's care to the ability that they're able to give that. And there's a shut off for that is built because they're cult victims too. I'm not saying they're horrible people. They're cult victims too. And it's just such a sad, awful thing. They can't really love you for who you are.
No, it's impossible. So yeah, so that was awful. It was traumatizing. It
That
was
is.
everything. And then the funeral was over. I went back kind of to my life. I started thinking I probably need to do something about getting back in, but I just, it's overwhelming when you're kind of on your own too. And it's that guilt. I would go to the memorial every year and I would sob and sob so hard the whole time. I just felt like I didn't belong and I wasn't good enough. And it was overwhelming to think about what I needed to do. And so it was just this like roller coaster. And so I couldn't deal with that. And so I wouldn't deal with it. So I'd leave and just ignore it and work. And, it was just this cycle of self-loathing, ignoring, ignoring. And I was out one night with a friend of mine and I ran into a guy that had been really good friends of my family growing up, really good friends with my brother and stuff. And he was disfellowshipped. So it was really great to reconnect with somebody who like knew my family, knew me, knew what it was like to be out. And we started dating. We were both disfellowshipped. And then we thought we were both mentally in. So we both thought this is like Jehovah's hand because we came together. So now we're going to get married and we're going to get back in. So we did. We got married fast. I mean, it was like 4 weeks after we were dating because I thought I knew him so well because I'd grown up with him. And so you're like, sure, like this is a great idea, plan.
And what framework again are you giving for how to know how much you even know a person?
Right. Correct. So we got married and then we got reinstated really quick. It was like in 6 months because we were together. We're showing up at every meeting. We had all of our personal study done. We were like doing all the things you're supposed to do in your disfellowship. So we wrote a letter. We were reinstated together, same hall, same night. It was a great thing. And then it was about 6 months later and it was like things started to shift really slowly at first. And then it just went downhill. So he had been working like this part-time job and then he just quit. And then he said, well, because whatever reason he gave me, I don't even remember now. And then he eventually got another job, but he was drinking every night. And it was a lot, like he was drinking a lot every night, like any good miserable Jehovah's Witness does. And he started just getting really, his personality just became very different. Like he started berating me, like it was little things at a time. And then it got worse and it got worse and it got worse. And it was a slow decline. And then eventually I found out that he was seeing someone from work. So I went to the elders. He went to the elders, but because their relationship wasn't fully physical, I didn't have grounds. So I had to stay married and forgive him, or like if I separated, you're probably divorced or disfellowshipped at some point. And I was so traumatized over the idea of being disfellowshipped again. So elders, of course, counsel me on do this better, do that better, be more attentive, don't question.
It's your fault that he's
support
doing
him. Yeah. So then I was taken so then he eventually quits that job. So then he's unemployed, and then his drinking really kicks up a notch. And then he just starts becoming so verbally abusive. And then he was starting to scare me. He's punching holes in walls and he's doing all this, throwing stuff. And I'm getting more like, this is not a good situation. And so it was a 7-year situation. So I was probably 5 of those years were miserable. I'm at the time working about 50 hours a week at my job, and I was driving an hour to it. I'm still prepping for all the meetings. I'm attending the meetings. I'm going to the meeting, pretending everything's okay. I'm giving him mints that he can eat before he goes to the meeting because he smells like booze. We're trying to auxiliary pioneer when I would take vacations because we think that's going to strengthen the marriage. And it was this hamster wheel of like me being afraid, unhappy, and terrified that I'm going to do something that's going to wreck the marriage so that I end up disfellowshipped again, or he ends up disfellowshipped. So in the meantime, it's any abusive relationship goes from you're terrible, this was a mistake, to I'm sorry, I would never do that again. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. I've had so much. And he would always talk about his trauma. He did have some bad things happen to him. I would never discount a person's experience, but he's talking to me like I don't understand what it's like to survive some hard stuff. And it just got worse, and he got worse. And then I came home one night, and it was on my birthday, and he was absolutely gone. Like blackout, but still functioning. And he got really physical with me, and I was able to get out. I left, and I just was like, that's it. Like, I don't care. But, I have to survive. So I talked to the elders. The elders are counseling me, and I'm starting to think to myself, like, this isn't okay that they keep trying to encourage me to get him to pray with me more and to study with me more, and sharing examples of abused wives whose husbands have turned around because of their great example. So I finally was in the elders meeting, and I just said, so I have a really serious question. And they said, what? I said, so if he kills me, when I'm resurrected in paradise, we both won't still be married to each other, right? Because when you're resurrected or when you die, you aren't married anymore. And I remember the one elder getting like red faced, but it was the only way I could get them to try to like understand how terrified I was and how bad the situation was escalating. And they just didn't care. They just didn't care. And in the meantime, I'm like barely financially keeping our head above water, and he's spending money on booze and all that and things that he shouldn't be while I'm trying to keep the lights on, literally. So I left. I did the thing you weren't supposed to do, and I left, and I filed for a divorce, even though we both were still witnesses. And I was a Jezebel. I had to change halls because the whispers and all the people supporting him when I would go to the hall because I had left. And people would say, oh, he's so depressed. And we went over and the house was just dirty and he's so sad. And nobody ever once said to me, what happened? Or are you okay? Or, all I could think of then, it started coming to me about other women growing up that had left husbands and how we all would say, oh, they left their family, like, like they're abandoning their kids or something. And that was never the case. So looking back, I'm like, oh my God, like people are talking about me like I'm one of those women from back then who like wanted some better life and ran off and for no reason. And I just remember being like mortified about it. And, it was just, the whole thing was just like overwhelming shock. And I thought to myself at the time, like, how could I end up in this situation? And now I go, well, because you were raised a witness, so you're conditioned to end up in abusive situations. Like,
oh yeah,
it's just another part of witness half the time.
well, yeah, Jehovah's Witnesses are abusive. And
Right.
so you've been raised around abusive people. You're going to end up tolerating abusive people until you understand that you have value and you don't have to tolerate abusive people anymore. And that's a very difficult thing to do when it's literally been everything that's been around you, from your God that you worship to the organization. I mean, just everything is abusive. You do what we say, it's all authoritarian. And if you don't do it, we will kill you or shun you because we can't kill you. If we could stone you, we would. But unfortunately, today's laws prevent that. So we'll just shun you instead. But there's no humanity. Where's the love?
Yeah. And the other thing too is I didn't have a great example for healthy relationships growing up, right? Like my dad was only around part-time, and
Sure.
But it's like, it's funny, I said not too long ago, I said there's a part of me that's kind of grateful for that now, because the other option is if I had a full-time spiritual dad, then I most likely would have repeated that pattern and ended up with some elder husband who maybe wasn't so outright abusive, but I was still stuck in an unhappy hamster wheel, right? Because it was the right thing. And one day you're both going to be perfect together. And you don't have to worry if you're not head over heels because, you put up with all of that until the paradise. So that would have been one option. And I was like, it's kind of like the fact that I'm kind of glad I was homeschooled in a way, because when I got out into the world, it was like, I didn't know what I didn't know. And all of a sudden I was an adult and I had more freedom to make decisions. Whereas if I had gone to public school knowing who I am as a person, I probably would have been even more of an uber Jehovah's Witness, because I would have had the peer pressure and I would have been like growing up, forcing myself to be like the perfect kid even more around worldly kids. So I'm like, who knows if I had had a typical mom and dad witness parents, if I would have ended up in an abusive situation or not. But either way, it would have still been an active witness and I wouldn't have been very happy.
Just FYI, I'll just go anecdotal. I can't quote hard numbers, but I would say that, well, look, if you're in a cult, you can't be healthy. You have to be dysfunctional to be in a cult. The cult is abusive. You're going to be abusive too in your own way. And so most of the people that I, know who had moms and dads who were both in the truth, their parents were abusive in their own ways. I mean, it's an abusive situation through and through. So there's really no alternative but to be. But this is the thing with abuse: is abusive people aren't abusive all the time, right? And so you have these moments, these wonderful moments with people, but at the end of the day, the way they make us feel about ourselves oftentimes is rather bad. And that's the outcropping of the abuse, is the way we feel about ourselves, and then what we will put up with or tolerate because we've been taught that that's really all we deserve.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean,
Sad.
I'm not surprised that I ended up in that situation. And I don't know if having different parental figures, like an elder dad and a pioneer mom, would have changed the course of who I married. I just know either way it would have ended up. It would have ended up another unhappy Jehovah's Witness marriage. And so I don't have regrets over the way that it took the course. I mean, I wouldn't have had to have been in a domestic violence situation for sure. But at the same time, I'm grateful I did get out. It's some women, you hear those stories.
Plenty of elders
For some
who beat their
reason.
wives. I mean,
Yes.
unfortunately, I mean, so you
Yes.
again, there's just abuse through and through. The organization is rife for it because, well, hey, you can do it and just get reproved.
Right.
Right? If you say you're sorry, and then you can just do it again and get better at grooming people to be quiet.
Yep.
It's really sad. I mean, I had the elder dad. He was abusive,
Yeah.
My mom auxiliary pioneered and such. She was abusive in her own way. They're just really sad situations. Again, nobody wins, but I'm glad that in the end, I'm sorry that it happened to you. Again, you said it earlier, another trauma. Thank you, Watchtower. Right? I mean, like that is the thing. I mean, you just have trauma after trauma after trauma in this organization, and they take and they take and they take because nobody around it's very healthy.
Nope.
Everybody's been traumatized, right? And I hurt people, end up hurting people. I can have compassion even at times for people who have been abusive because I know it often comes from somewhere. It doesn't make it okay or right. And they, if someone does something against the law, they need to be punished for it, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, it comes from somewhere. And this is just, you see, it's just generational trauma just being repeated over and over and over inside of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah, and they are really good at amplifying narcissism within a person too. And so you have someone like that I was married to that was, first of all, if you're a woman in the organization, you're a sub-citizen, right? So he's
Sure.
automatically going to be more important. That's just, and I remember when this first happened, and after he'd sobered up like a few days later, and I wanted to have a conversation, and I said, you need to leave. And he said, I'm not leaving my house. Well, it was my house. I paid for it. It was everything, but that's his. And he really felt that way. Like it was, and that's what he said. He said, I'm the man. This is my place. This are my things. And on top of it though, he'd been to Bethel, and he was like the only son of an elder and auxiliary pioneer. So he was this elevated status of a reputation of, he'd done all these things. And so his personal opinion of himself was even more amplified because of what the organization pumps into you.
Yes, it's just as it is horrible to teach women that they're this weaker vessel and somehow less than. It is also horrible to teach men that just by nature of having a penis, that they are somehow like gods,
Right.
and to almost be venerated in some way. And you end up with these super emotionally immature, entitled jerks who end up being these elders or whatever in the congregation. Not to say that all elders are. There are obviously some wonderful people who think they're helping, and then they do genuinely care. But there's very little empathy, and that's where the narcissism comes from, because you're not really taught to see other people. You're taught not to see other people because they're all going to be murdered anyway, any day now by God. So why bother caring about them?
Right.
They're a threat to you.
Yeah.
It's sad. Again, nobody wins. Everybody loses in this environment. It's just so terrible.
Yeah, and it really takes away, even though obviously I feel like you are responsible for your choices and you are responsible, etc. It does take away a person's potential. So, I think there were other things about him that he didn't want to face or deal with too much. And I think if he had been given the freedom of um, being vulnerable and talking to a therapist and admitting things that he felt or thought, maybe he as a person could have been healthier and better. And so I, of course, hold him accountable for the things that he did that were abusive to me. But at the same time, I do have a level of compassion and empathy, understanding that you are not fully in control of yourself when you are a witness. You are not given the freedom to fix things that are broken by saying, I think there's something wrong, and getting real help rather than let's pray. And so I don't know, I just feel neutral now about the situation because people say, I hope my ex is okay. Like, I don't wish anything bad has happened to him, but I truly hope he got help. I truly hope that he's not as miserable.
It's a lovely way to feel about another human being. I mean, in the end, if he gets help, doesn't that elevate everybody? Why would we want someone to not be elevated and make the world that they interact with a better place?
And at least for the sake of someone that he may be in a relationship later, right? Like, if it means saving someone else, I hope he helps himself so that he doesn't find himself in a pattern of damaging other people.
Well, yeah. And so again, you talk about choice, the nature of choice. All of our choices are informed by our base psychology, our base biology, where we come from, where we are today, the mental and emotional tools we've been exposed to. So choice isn't made in a vacuum. Choice is made with all this complexity around it. And we have far less control of our choices than Jehovah's Witnesses teach, that everything is just a matter of choice, and you just choose better. Well, look at the nature of hormones and how it makes people act, or people who have traumatic brain injuries. Suddenly they choose things differently, almost like it's not just something that we can all just magically do all the time and do right. There's lots of things that impact the way that we behave as human beings. If I don't sleep well, my diet's out the window the next day because that's just, your discipline goes out with your lack of sleep, right? So we're all humans, and the less we all hurt, the better.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that was a wild time, but it's anything else. I wish it hadn't happened, but since it did, I'm trying to use it for compassion and help for other people that have gone through similar.
Good for you.
Thanks.
So that's all we can all do, right? For all of our experiences throughout this, like you're doing that right now by sharing your story. So where did you go from there after you left?
So then I I had moved to another city. I was going to a different hall. I was still working. I was just so low, though. I just didn't really feel like I belonged. I just felt like a Jezebel, like I had made this choice and I was not being shunned. People were still reaching out somewhat, not from my old congregation because they did think I'd done something terrible. But, the new congregation, they were friendly to me and everything because I had been the one that divorced and left and all that. And
you weren't, were you?
I wasn't disfellowshipped.
Formally reproved or anything?
No. Well, I lost my privileges, but it wasn't even like a private reproval. I just they suspended my privileges for like 2 months or something weird. But one of the elders actually said to me in our meeting about it. He said, I want you to know that we all know what he's like. And we know that he is a complete ass, is what he said during my meeting with them. And I was like, oh, so it was some validation. But then, of course, in the next breath, but people have gone through worse and blah, blah, blah. And I just kind of tuned out at that point. And then I just I left and I was like, I'm moving. I'm moving to the city where I work. I'm getting away. I'm in fresh start. I can't deal with this anymore. I haven't done anything wrong. Like, they're going to have to just deal with him. He can stay in this home. They can have him. So I did. And then I was working. Then I met someone, started dating them, not a witness. Same thing that happened the first time, got in trouble. But I was more like, I really didn't care then. And I was still mentally like, I thought it was the right doctrine, but I was really doubting if this is the right organization, because how can you treat people like this? So when I went to the elders and was like, this is what I'm doing, they said the same thing. Is it over? Do you think you're going to do it again? And I said, nope, it's not over. And yep, I'm certainly going to do it again. And so I was disfellowshipped that night. It was tough because I had to tell my family again, right? So you have to tell them all again, like it's my second time out. Dating this person who was, quote, worldly and was like more compassionate, kind than anybody I'd ever met before. Met his family, realized that you can have healthy, happy, transparent relationships, conversations without judgment. And I was so shocked by it that people ask me all the time, like, what did you read or what did you see or whatever that made you wake up? And honestly, it wasn't like some YouTuber. It wasn't some ex-JW book. It was 100% seeing relationships between people who showed you what actual true affection and acceptance was. That was it. And I mean, I was on that cusp of like, maybe I wasn't really raised in a really healthy organization. I was like starting to feel this. And I watched that movie Apostasy.
Oh yeah.
From the UK. And my now fiance watched it with me. And I just remember being so shocked because I couldn't pick it apart. I couldn't say they're exaggerating this or they're lying about that. And I started like hyperventilating almost. And I was like, I have to really like think about some things. And this had been years. I'd been out for 4 years or 5 years, 5 years, I think by that point. He was my boyfriend at the time. He's my fiance now. He's always really patient, never pushed. He would ask me questions just out of curiosity, but he never once ever said, that's weird, that's wrong. What do you mean? He just kept that very like, okay, and would move on. And then I watched that movie and we had to pause it because they were talking about beards. And he didn't know that. He was like, wait, and he paused it and he looked at me. He's like, is that true? Like, it's like a thing. So I had to say it. And the more I would start saying things out loud and hearing it in my ears and watching the expression of someone that never was, try to go like, okay, and not look shocked or appalled because be like, I was becoming shocked and appalled. And so I one day, and then I did start like kind of just random things, just reading or watching random things. But in the meantime, I was traveling a lot for work and they had all these different specials about different cults on. One was about like Faith Assembly, the Faith Assembly cult. One was about, I just forget the name of it, the Keep Sweet guy, the really creepy.
Oh, the FLDS?
FLDS, the Warren Jeffs. The other one was like Scientology. And every single one of them, I was seeing a thread or threads that were extremely close to what it was like being raised a witness. And I came home one day. So this was all like outside pretty much, except for the movie Apostasy, but it was mostly just random stuff. And I came home one day. I finally started Googling things. And I told Logan, I said, I think I was raised in a cult. And he very calmly said, I know, honey, we all know. We've all known that. He's like, but I'm really proud of you. And I thought, really? You've been able to keep your mouth shut like all this time? And, you know, because he was just so patient. And he was like, I knew you'd get there. He's like, it's totally fine. And so that's ended up the way that I started to wake up. And then I was disfellowshipped, and my brother, who was my only lifeline, he was the one that told me originally years ago. He said we were raised in a cult. And I remember getting so mad at him because I was still mentally in. And then he shut up about it. Like he knew, like, okay, I can't use that phrase with her anymore. Like, so we spent all of our time together and stuff. And so during this time that I'm waking up, he passed away suddenly, unexpectedly. And he was only 42. And so it was like an earth-shattering time, like absolutely earth-shattering for me. So then I had to, you know, I was his emergency contact. So I was the one that was informed by the police. And then I had to tell my siblings, who were not fully shunning me. I mean, they didn't come and visit, but they would check in on me every once in a while just to make sure I was doing okay and stuff. And then I had to inform them, right, that like their brother another sibling had died, and he was disfellowshipped at the time. So everyone came back, my whole family, because they're in different states. All my siblings came back together. We had like a memorial service, but it was at the gravesite. So all of his friends and other people came, and all of us spoke. And I just remember thinking it was such a lovely time because it was an actual memorial to him. Growing up, my whole life, funerals were just, as we all know, an opportunity to preach. Spent 5 minutes talking about the person. You spent 45 minutes talking about paradise and Jehovah and Armageddon and do this so you can see him again. So in this instance, we were all able to we just talked about him, and we talked about him as a person, our memories. And it was the most like beautiful. And even my siblings, who of course were witnesses after, kept talking about what a phenomenal service and day that it was, because there was no, you know, my brother wasn't religious. He was atheist by then. So there was no like spiritual stuff talked about. It was just him as a person and how he touched everybody's lives and what he'd done. And so it was very cathartic. And everybody went back to their own lives after that. Then my siblings kind of would check on me more, because I think there was fear from them because they experienced a trauma too, right? They lost another brother. So they're afraid for me, like I'm disfellowshipped and they don't know what's going to happen. So they're fear driven to contact me more regularly. And then it sat with me for a while, and I just started getting more angry and more angry and more angry, because I was like, y'all didn't have anything to do with him the last decade. You might have checked on him once in a while, but I'm the one that was here. I'm the one that we were bonded. We did fun, awesome things together. We cried together. We had real conversations about the abuses of what we grew up with being a witness. And I'm like, but you come back and you think that like you knew him, and you think I just had I was just angry. And that was kind of that final nail in the witnesses are a cult coffin. Like that's not how you treat people. You don't shun somebody for a decade with occasional check-in, basically to make sure they're still alive. And, you know, say, I love you. I hope you get back to Jehovah, because that's your obligation, right? And then grieve their losses if you were there every day, day in and day out, through the good, the bad, and the ugly. That's not what love is. And that was it. They like to say, I kicked the dust off my feet and I moved on. It's like, it's not healthy. And it's, it's just an ongoing trauma to be associated with that organization.
Yes. So how did you wake up, or was there anything that helped you wake up to so I mean, like, this is all kind of interpersonal, seeing their lack of love, seeing that it's not healthy. Was there anything that helped you to break down like the doctrine or anything that helped you after you left?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I started really. So when you're a witness, whether you go to public school or you're homeschooled, you can't really learn about science.
True.
Like you can learn about basic, but you have to temper it with the creation book, right? The blue creation book. And the like, well, some scientists feel this way, but really, and they're either amplifying or exaggerating or twisting the words of other scientists. So honestly, I started like I was a student. I started researching and figuring things out about like the science, because I always liked science, but I couldn't really learn it the way it should have been taught. And so I started down that path of like, I want to really explore like the whole science behind why we're alive and how we got here and all of that. And so it started like being overwhelmed. There's overwhelming evidence that we didn't come from Adam and Eve 6,000 years ago. And that was like what put me on the path. And then, I did find other, even ex-religious people, or cult people, not just ex-witnesses. And it really helped me tie the pieces together. Like I mentioned earlier, when I watched things that like, yes, the witnesses are awful. Yes, our experiences are unique to being a witness, but there is a common thread to other cults as well. And yeah, doctrinally, there are so many weird things that you take for granted because you don't want to deep dive. And one day I was like really, really thinking about the doctrine of the witnesses, besides the whole, like, if Jehovah draws you, why are you preaching conflict? But the other big one for me that ended up happening is I really, really thought about the whole, like, Armageddon comes, paradise starts, but then you have to start resurrecting people. And so you have 1,000-year span that you have to get all this stuff accomplished. And then you have all these billions of people coming back. But if it's only 7 million witnesses that survive, and I did all the math, that's one witness per however many million people that they have 1,000 years to educate. And then, okay, let's say you can cram that in 1,000 years, but you're also having to restore the earth. Gets all restored. All your memories are just of nothing but good things. And then boom, Satan's back. And, they always said, like, he's let loose for a little while. He'd be let loose for a little while. And they'd say, well, it has to be a little while. But then non-believing me thinks, do we really know it's going to be a little while? Because you've been saying a little while for hundreds of years. So if you're perfect now, a little while could be a couple thousand years. So let's give him benefit of the doubt. Let's say it's just going to be 1,000 years, right? Satan's running around. I've survived Armageddon. I now have to survive another Satan attack. I then have to survive a second Armageddon, watch all these people I taught and got close to die off again. And then it's really paradise. But is it really? Because then they say, well, what if another angel 2 billion years down the road decides he wants to do what Satan did? Or let's say a person has a doubt, they express a doubt. And I remember circuit overseer saying, well, Jehovah is not going to let it get to that far. So he'll just eliminate the threat immediately. And so I'm like, okay, I've survived Armageddon. I've survived basically a second Armageddon. And then I have a really close bond with this person who's made it all the way through with me. And we're walking down the road one day and they say to me, have you ever wondered if really Jehovah did create just Adam and Eve? And then boom, they're dead. And then I'm like no one, like, death isn't really ever going to truly be no more. They tell you but that's a lie, because people are going to keep dying at some point. So I Like when I started doing the actual math on it, I was like, this is the most asinine, ridiculous belief. And that was it.
And I've got to throw something else into your equation because somebody brought it up to me recently and I hadn't thought about it. But I mean, didn't Jehovah already have an Armageddon in Noah's day? Why
Right.
didn't he just go ahead then and make Noah and his family come back to perfection and then we just go from there? Why do we have to keep kicking the can down the road? And how many people have to die and suffer? And for what?
And how many times do you have to be tested in your
Well,
life?
yeah,
You
if
know, it's
Jehovah
like,
can if Jehovah at the end, when you're all past the paradise, the initial phase of the 1,000-year reign, and then Satan being let loose, if after that somebody could just mess up and he just boom, he erases them, why didn't he do that from the beginning? Why
right.
in the how dumb is he? Why in
Because
the world
he
did he
had
have to do all of this to learn that?
because he was real excited about watching his firstborn son die.
I
So
guess.
only thing I can think, it's like, I could probably do this, but instead I'm going to send you down and make you die and suffer too. Like, what kind of weird, warped,
He
and
has a flair for the dramatic.
I know, I know, I know.
It just doesn't make
Yeah.
sense. It doesn't add up. So I'm glad you were able to see that. That always bothered me too. Like, why are we going to be tested again? Haven't we done enough? When is it ever enough?
Right. Just when the PTSD starts to wear off, you got to get it. Go get it again.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah,
Um,
and then I started watching just a little bit of some of the recent broadcasting stuff and some of the recent like literature. Cause I mean, I hadn't seen or anything for like almost 10 years. And it was like shocking to me because I couldn't believe how much they've dumbed things down and how far they've gotten away from like teaching actually like the Bible. And that was just, and it was so jarring to me that I can't figure out how some, because that's what I said earlier. I wonder how my mom would have felt about it now because she was a heavy Bible student. She studied all the time and she was always like, but where is this in the Bible? Whereas she was like, she would question certain things and make sure that so I don't know what she would be thinking now. But then I'm like, my siblings all grew up with me and they're all still drinking the Kool-Aid. So I don't know.
yeah. They slowly infantilize you over time
Yeah.
and turn your brain off.
Yeah.
That's part of making it so dead simple. The things we used to, you and I, growing up in the 80s, we knew our Bibles. It was how fast can you whip it out and like get to the right verse? And
Yep.
how can today you meet one of Jehovah's Witnesses and they're just like, go to jw.org. That's can't you
No.
defend your own beliefs? Do you know what you believe? It's really
Yep.
sad.
And I remember being like 14 years old and conducting Bible studies out of the Red Live Forever book and like explaining 607 BCE with the tree,
Yep.
with the bands. And like, can you imagine a 14-year-old witness doing that now? Like anyone that's like recently come up. And I would bet because I've tried to just stay kind of removed. I don't go down that rabbit hole of like watching too much of their stuff anymore because I just, I'll a clip here or there, but I can't just watch a broadcast. But I don't even know if they would really teach that anymore. Or I think they probably want to shy away from 1914 since the overlapping generation is overlapping again. So yeah, the overlap on the overlap. Oh,
No, they'll just create something else. I mean,
yep.
it is what it is. They'll string people along. So today, you're still shunned by your siblings, and then obviously, I guess all the Jehovah's Witnesses that were in your life.
Yep, absolutely. They would have a conversation with me once in a while about something specific because both our parents had passed. My dad had passed a few years ago.
Mhm.
So it was like, I have a sister who brought me her tub of pictures to leave because made everything digital and she wanted to know if I'm the one people give everything to that they want to get rid of because Armageddon's coming. So my house is full of stuff that I'm holding on to, that hopefully the next generation will wake up and they'll take some of this stuff off my hands. But so they would do things like that once in a while. And then I got an email from my sister, and all of us were on it. And basically it was about updating the headstone for my dad. And it was kind of the last straw for me because he'd been shunned. And I'm like, why do you care about this headstone now that he's gone? And I kind of lit into everybody. And then I went down the rabbit hole in the email about the fact that we were raised in a cult, and, shunning is emotional blackmail. And we have been emotionally manipulated. And if you want to ever talk to me and have transparent conversation, I'm here for it. But I can't deal with this, like, reaching out to me basically when you need something. That isn't what relationships are. And I love you, and I said, I wish that you would watch the Australian Royal Commission. And I had dinner with some people who had also been witnesses not long before that. So they had said to me, do you think Jehovah's Witness individuals are good people? And my initial knee-jerk reaction was to say yes. But then I really thought about it, and I got a response from one of my siblings that said, yes, I watched the Australian Royal Commission all the way through. And I replied, I don't know how you can watch it and see whatever it was, 1,800 documented cases, and not one was reported to authorities. And you agree with that? And then I said, but I can, because you know what happened in our family, in my situation, and you still have a relationship with my abuser because they're still worshiping your God. And I said, so I do get it in a way. And that was it. They found out I have a channel, and yeah, I'm pretty much dead to most of them, but my hope rests on all their kids that are coming of age. So
Absolutely. And you never know. So your channel is?
A is for apostate.
Mm-hmm. And so I think that kind of takes it to that next level, right? Now that you've spoken out, you are that, apostate with the capital A, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that is going to, for any active Jehovah's Witness, going to really cement things for them. That you would dare to speak about what you've been through and to own your own story, when they'd like you just to keep quiet, go away, and not say anything. So,
yeah. And I think that the belief, at least it had always been mine about apostates, was the fact that they're trying to take down the organization. And, that's, most of us are just trying to take back our power and take back our voice.
mm-hmm.
If that ends up bringing down the organization, that's their fault, not mine. Like I'm literally just giving you facts of what I grew up with. And if your faith can't take the facts and you have to shun me out of your life because it's a peril, because the actual truth is a peril to you, that is your responsibility. It is not mine to make your belief system palatable to you.
No, and you're also saying that, like, so I, Mike Shimwell, am more powerful than Jehovah, and I am going to take down his organization. I am such a threat from my basement studio in Indiana. I am going to wreck this organization. But what I love is that they give talks like this, about the apostates. I love that they're afraid of us. Like, it just shows how ridiculous it all is. You believe that you have the universal sovereign, and you're afraid of me? What is wrong with you? I'm not even one of these, like, take down the tower persons. I'm just like, hey, let's help some people and let's make people feel less alone, and let's promote mental health. But yeah, it's just so, it's funny how much power they give me and you and people like us. Really?
Yeah. And it used to really boggle my mind. But then I realized, I had a realization, and I was like, witnesses, you're taught to every opportunity that you speak about your religion, right? You have 10 seconds with a person, you're going to figure out a way to bring up Jehovah or give them a tract or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized they think that's what we're doing as apostates. They think we're living, eating, breathing, sleeping, this reverse witnessing. And it's like, I'm just out here living my life, doing things I enjoy, having conversations that are transparent about whatever parts of my life. And sometimes having been a witness comes into that conversation. But like, I think that's what their concept is, because they are so about witnessing all the time. They think that's what we are going to do or try to do. If I'm in a room with you and you're a witness, I'm going to immediately start giving you facts about the organization. And like, that's so far from what any of us, the way we operate. But
no, I might do that with a worldly person, just a non-Jehovah's Witness. I hate using the word worldly, but
yeah,
I might tell them, unwitnessed to them a little bit, but I'm not going to waste my time on an active Jehovah's Witness. They're not going to listen to anything that I say because their minds are closed. If they're asking questions, maybe I can, maybe I could have a conversation with them, but otherwise there's no use. I might as well go talk to the wall over here. It doesn't do any good. So I wouldn't spend my time doing that. You did mention though, just living your life. So what's that look like today? What is life for JoHannah? What do you love about it? And is there anything that do you have hopes or dreams for the future or anything, or just loving what you got today?
Yeah, both. I mean, life is fabulous. I really am grateful that I took that trade school years ago and I went against the organization's suggestions, and I ended up embarking on some type of career because, during the time I was a witness, and I was married, it helped me to have a place to feel safe, go to work and feel like I was doing a good job at what my corporate role was. And even though some people counseled me against it, I had to do it because I was keeping us afloat. And it's all been from that moment of taking that trade school all those years ago has parlayed into me being independent and being able to take care of myself, which is the opposite of what they want women to be in the organization. And then you learn to choose things you want that make you happy instead of taking a course that you're supposed to. So my relationships are authentic, transparent, extremely happy. And I don't think that witnesses even understand what that looks like from a very basic standpoint, somebody that you're married to or somebody that is your parent or your child, because like I said earlier, so much of that has to be guarded. And to live a life where I can just be my authentic self, I can say what I actually feel, what I actually wonder about, and I have the right partner who vice versa, right? We have an actual honest communication. And so it's, those parts of it are great. I have amazing friends that I do fun things with, and there's more laughs than not. And so having those relationships is like the foundation of my life. But like I say, I enjoy my job. I do other things that I used to probably think were silly or a waste of time when I could be studying the Watchtower. I write a lot. I do short stories. I do other things that maybe are considered frivolous, but they're a passion. And all those things that you can enjoy with no guilt, no shame, go cosplay, go read comics. So that's what I try to live my life to the fullest with no ties to feel bad about if I should do something or if I shouldn't, because those days are gone. And, we love to travel too. So meeting other people, seeing different places, it's a rich, fulfilled life. So I'm super happy.
That's awesome. I think that's the place to leave this. You're super happy. I mean, at the end of the day, isn't that what we're trying to be is happy in our lives? And that's why I end every episode with love others, do no harm, and go be happy, right? Because it ultimately life is about finding our happiness and doing so in a way where we can be authentically ourselves and let other people be the same. And I think that's a wonderful world and one that I appreciate living in today.
Same. Yep. Same. And I think, more people should experience it and just, take the leap. It's great.
Yeah.
This side of that wall of the watchtower.
Yeah, absolutely. Come on, be free. Let's do it together. That's awesome.